Hi there, I'm your host, John Ivison. I'm joined as usual by Marcella Munro of Macmillan Vantage and Andrew Balfour of Rubicon Strategies to discuss the odds and sods of politics this week. I think first off, Justin Trudeau is in Washington, where he is joining Presidents Biden and Obrador for a 3 Amigos summit. It remains to be seen whether there will be much amicability there. Joe Biden came to Ottawa, I remember, when he was still Vice President, and talked about passing the torch for Justin Trudeau to preserve the international rules of the road. He now seems to be riding roughshod over those rules when it comes to electric vehicles. But people who might have thought there would be more affinity between Biden and Trudeau have been disappointed. And it doesn't seem that the President is in the mood to do any favours for his Liberal fellow traveller. Is anybody surprised, Marcella?
Well, you know, the U.S. rarely does favors for other countries unless there's something in it for them, right? I'm saying that they did lend us some vaccines when we were having trouble accessing vaccines. So, you know, they haven't been totally shunning us. But listen, there's lots of issues on the table right now, and like all Western governments, the U.S. and Canada are struggling with a number of economic concerns where their national interest is probably going to be the first thing that they're worried about in these meetings. And so, yeah, there's going to be some tension, particularly around this electric vehicle rebate that President Biden's offering Americans. We'll see whether that can stand as a quote unquote just made in the States policy, simply because, you know, we do have a free trade arrangement with them, and the car industry is an integral part of that free trade agreement and how we reached it. But, you know, there's, like I said, all politics is domestic, especially right now, whether you're talking about, you know, how we're coming through the COVID recovery. We know there's massive supply chain problems that's affecting North America. And so they've probably got a long list of things they want to talk about, but they're going to want to come out of this at least looking collegial. You know, I don't think we're going to see this trade spat take over.
No, I mean, Canada does have some leverage in that it has the critical minerals that are needed to make batteries, but I don't see Trudeau saying you can't get them unless you overturn this pretty hefty incentive. It was $12,000 per car if you buy an EV made in the US in a union plant. But it's a bit ironic, Andrew, that we managed to get a free trade deal with a sworn protectionist in Donald Trump. And the guy who is succeeding him and who is meant to be the healing all the wounds that Trump created is now, I mean, it's a 33% discount on Canadian prices, which is really going to hurt the car industry. And to even more than just the actual sales, it looks like the whole car industry is going to gravitate south of the border, because we've seen there's a story about a Prisma plant in Brampton that makes Dodge Chargers. When it stops making Dodge Chargers, the electric vehicle replacement is likely to be made in Illinois so that they can avail themselves of the incentives. Biden apparently believes this is not in contravention of USMCA, the new NAFTA. It's hard to see how that's true, don't you think?
Well, at the end of the day, higher powers than the president will decide whether this is actually allowed or legitimate. I would also look at it a different way, and this is the age-old thing when we come around the auto parts. Well, they go bouncing it back and forth across the borders repeatedly, so it's always very difficult to say whether this is all American or all Canadian or all Mexican. And as we've discussed before, I think that the Prime Minister can hopefully get a deal where, you know, it's a USMCA-made car. On the point
Which
of the
Mexicans
Brampton
will also
plant,
be pushing for, presumably, right? Because there's a lot of that that goes on at the southern border as well.
On the example of the Brampton plant, Brampton is a very important political part of the country for the current government. They hold every seat there. They will be working on that. They also have the great assistance of Jerry Dias at Unifor, who will be working incredibly hard to keep that. So this isn't all done deal, but as much as everyone wants to focus on this auto stuff, there's a million different issues we have going on right now. The Line 5 thing is wildly significant. And the fact that they're our largest trading partner, we can't just focus on the one thing. There's a lot of different things that the Prime Minister and the President are.
Well, let's look at that. I mean, I do think that the autos is particularly important right now, given the fact that our largest export earner is oil and gas, and we know the problems that it's facing, and our second largest export earner is autos. So if you have our two largest industries fighting with one hand tied behind their back, we've got a real problem. But you mentioned other issues.
I don't know that I think the oil and gas industry has a hand tied behind their back, but continue.
Well, clearly we've got a cap on production or a cap on emissions, which is the same thing as a cap on.
No, it hasn't been negotiated.
Andrew?
When you mentioned the rare minerals, I mean, what we saw the other day when Premier Ford came out, and he's opposed to the EV subsidies on Teslas and things like that, but he's not opposed to the one like reasonably priced cars. But the Ring of Fire is a home of a lot of these critical minerals, and it'll be a much better thing for Americans to get it from Canada than from overseas, just based on shipping costs, et cetera. So the expansion of the Ring of Fire.
These are logical arguments, and I think that they do carry some weight. But I sat down with some American diplomats recently, and I was kind of struck by how annoyed they are with Canada. And I wrote a piece for the Post this week quoting Mark Norman, former Vice Chair of the Chief of the Defence Staff, and Andrew Leslie, who was a former Liberal MP, former Lieutenant General, both of whom are saying that people in Canada don't understand that the Americans view everything through the lens of security, whereas we view it through the lens of trade and what we can get out of the Americans. And there's no two ways about it that Canada has not lived up to its commitments on the defence front. While we've paid lip service to fighter jets and more ships, very little has emerged. We have not spent a lot of the money that's been allocated. And when it comes to modernising NORAD, although we signed a joint statement in August, although the fact that replacing some of these radar installations was in the Liberal platform, there is no money allocated to it, and nothing is happening on it, and it does not appear to be a priority for this government. And that, in their explanation, is why we don't get a great hearing when it comes to this president or any other president. Marcella?
Well, I think it's a bit much to go that far, in the sense that, listen, since August, we've had an election. We've just had, we had a new government elected. They've just sworn in new cabinet. We don't have a speech from the throne or a budget yet. So I don't know that we can say with certainty that they won't follow through on the NORAD commitment. Everybody knows that radar system is past its best before date. And I've got to think that if they can see through the weeds of the massive amount of work they have to do at defense around issues around harassment, that there are people there that are thinking hard and looking long at what's going on, not just in Russia, which of course is our northern border challenges, but also in China. So I don't know that we can say Canada's out of it yet, completely on that file. But I do think it's very fair to say that we definitely approach the U.S. and our interests with them in a very different way. I also think, I guess, the other pushback I would have, though, is that most American presidents have been, very nationalist in their view. They're, which please name for me the most internationalist president we've had of our lifetime in terms of caring more about external matters than what's going on in their backyard.
No, that's fair. But we have seen presidents doing a solid for their friend in Ottawa. Ronald Reagan with Brian Mulroney, for example. I don't think that similar relationship exists between Biden and Trudeau. Maybe it's an age thing, whatever it is. It may have existed with Obama. I don't think it exists with Trudeau.
Quickly, to be fair, no, I don't think a prime minister and a president are ever going to have the same relationship that Reagan and Mulroney had ever again.
Well, I think Obama and Trudeau probably did, but it was for a very brief
period. What I'm saying is that Reagan and Mulroney had a long, long time together. But just one quick thing on what you're talking about around defense is, Trump used to chide us about the fact that we didn't live up to our NATO commitment as well. And we saw what happened with the Aussies and the U.S. around the South China Sea. And if they decide that the Arctic is an issue around Russia and China as well, they might force our hand. And we have a sub-program coming up like that. there.
Well, I think that is entirely possible, but I do think that they see Australia as a far more serious nation than they see Canada.
The Arctic is a massive sleeper issue, in my view, that we don't talk about nearly enough in this country.
For sure, and it's with China's ambitions there, it's going to be a growing story. But we've got a limited amount of time. We have to get round to our weekly look at Erin O'Toole's troubles, because every week something else, another mole pops up that he has to whack. And
this time the mole was wearing a senator's badge. Yeah,
well, it seemed to be planned out to be a senator because, with a caucus member, that would have required a major upheaval to get a vote to kick them out. With the senator, he was just able to oust the senator. How much trouble's he in, Marcella, do you think?
I mean, it's hard to tell. I think we all sort of thought, when we talked last week about his appointments to his critic portfolios, I think we all thought he'd sort of taken some steps there to, get people rowing in the same direction, I guess, in the lead up to the session. And then to your point, this happens this week, and now he's off message again. And now there's questions about, whether he is he using enough of a stick as opposed to a carrot? Well, he was pretty fast to react this time, right? I mean, she was thrown out of caucus it was less than 24 hours, I feel like. It was pretty speedy. So presumably that sends a bit of a signal. Unlike the other Conservative having a rocky time, Jason Kenney, I would say that O'Toole, at least he has people in that caucus that are publicly willing to defend him and say this is bananas what we're doing and it needs to stop, right? So that's got it. You've got to think that some of those voices will help calm down. But what they've really got to do, though, is start talking seriously about some of these issues. Like they're kind of letting all these big issues go by. They don't really have much to say on climate, which of course is now in the news again because of the situation in British Columbia. They haven't even really been able to hold siege. I don't agree with them on the economic stuff, but they haven't even really been able to dig in there. So they've got some real work to do.
Yeah, I mean, every story you read has the Conservative opposition leader's office was not available for comment, which is lunacy. I mean, the fact that they don't even comment on any of this stuff it just leaves a vacuum that other people fill. Andrew, what do you think?
Well, first, I think that while the Prime Minister's in Washington, he should go by the White House gift shop and get Erin O'Toole a gift again. It's just helping him out left, right, and center.
Just every week be sending him a present.
A new gift, yeah. Maybe he did get a muffin basket last week. I don't know. But I think that what is happening is as bad as it is right now for O'Toole. It seems like it's actually bringing his caucus together around him, because you've seen some outspoken voices saying that this is getting in the way of them actually being able to oppose the government, which is what they're here for. I think the bigger issue is how long do you keep it together? Even when Stephen Harper had a majority government, he had people on the social conservative wing speaking out and causing problems, and rarely were people thrown out of caucus. So I think to Marcella's earlier point, your point, John, by design, it was a senator who also, I'd just like to point out, was the same lady who was such an Andrew Scheer supporter that she was opposed to him being thrown out in the same way last time. So it's kind of a bit of irony there.
Well, that's maybe why.
Right.
And presumably she's talking to the same MPs who supported Scheer as well. I mean, it does strike me that O'Toole's opponents have it wrong, that voters are not scared or upset or disenchanted with O'Toole. They're in fact disenchanted with the people who are criticising him and the fact that they might have a voice if O'Toole was ever to get into government. And I do think that they're just missing the bigger picture, which is this inexorable leftward shift by the Liberal Party to absorb the NDP, and there are huge swathes of voters who feel homeless, who care about defence, who care about free enterprise.
Like what percentage of voters, John?
Fiscal responsibility.
I don't think.
Let's look at how the election went. The Conservatives actually got more votes. They need to get more votes in the suburbs of the big cities, and I think there are plenty of people, including large ethnic communities, who care about some of the things that the Conservatives are talking about, but they're worried about the spectre over Erin O'Toole's shoulder.
Well, I agree with that. I guess what I'm trying to say is that I think the success in that election was more because Mr. O'Toole managed to take, frankly, a more centrist position than his party has in a while. It doesn't mean he wasn't more conservative on some of the questions you're speaking to, right? But you're quite right when you say it was this kind of fringe element, if you will, that was sort of anti-vax and on all that kind of good stuff.
It scares off centrist voters.
Sure.
I think that any time you've got a leader who leads his party, the gravitational pull from the traditional wings is always hard and it's always rocky. And I think at least O'Toole has bought himself some time here, because we now know that there's unlikely to be a leadership review until their convention, which I think is August 2023.
Right, but he could still get knifed then. But with that
said,
he
could still get knifed then, but you've got to think that between now and then, all he's doing is shoring up his support and bringing in, putting people where they can help him, and freezing out his rivals.
Absolutely, and that's the smart thing to do. But you can only, I could run this water glass in many ridings.
Is that water? Is it full of water?
I'm sure it is.
Like water.
In many ridings in Alberta, and it could win. I mean, you're talking about, you made the point about he got more votes. Well, I can also run this water glass in Toronto Centre as a Liberal. You can only win each riding once. So the vote count doesn't matter. It's about the efficiency of the vote. It's about targeting the right seats. What we've seen in the last two elections is that the popular vote in this country doesn't actually really matter anymore. It's about getting into the right places with the right people and the right message. And I think that what is happening with the Conservative Party right now is that this infighting and these bad kind of outcomes that are happening might be helping them in rural Western Canada for the people like Senator Batters, who was just expelled from caucus. And maybe they don't understand that and the gun thing and the vax thing, that's not helping them win any 905 seats, and they can never form government unless...
No, well, let's talk about 905. I mean, in the shuffle, they just put Tim Uppal, who's a Sikh, into the outreach position.
And Alberta lives in Ottawa?
Well, it's
just to be clear,
it's a job which is aimed at winning over seats like Brampton that used to be held by the Conservatives.
Yes.
It's not like it's
what they really need, I think. I mean, is about 10 more Melissa Lastmans, right? They need that kind of, she's a conservative. She's got really strong conservative values. She happens to be Jewish. She's an out lesbian. She's old school. I mean, she probably doesn't call herself a progressive conservative, but I would call her one. I would have probably voted for her if she was in my riding. So they need a lot more people like that, right? That just come across as sensible. They can have those conservative values.
But you look at at what he did in the shuffle, and there were people like Eric Duncan, who is a gay man from rural Eastern Ontario. I mean, there are people in that caucus who have really not been in the spotlight, and I think that it's a changing party, and the Trudeau-Freeland axis cannot rule this country forever. So the question is the Conservative Party going to reform itself successfully and be deemed a viable alternative, or is the Liberal Party going to reform itself and offer up an alternative view of governing Canada to this free spending? I'll stop there.
The economy is going to shift gears at some point, and the free spending, quote unquote, Liberals will pivot. I still stick back to what I've been saying to you about this a bunch, which is that we're not there yet in terms of the effects of the pandemic being behind us. And so, we're still in shift mode, and we're probably on the same page as almost every other country in the OECD.
Yeah.
Big debt.
Andrew, any closing thoughts?
Your access comment is quite entertaining, but I think that...
I didn't mean it as in axis of evil.
No, I'm not suggesting you did. It's just an interesting
term.
Some
people might say that, not me.
You might write that sometime soon. I think that if the Conservatives continue down the road they're on right now, which is creating divisions in their own party and they end up having any form of splinter group. They make it so that Freeland-Trudeau axis will run this country for much longer than one would think.
I agree, which I think reinforces the point I was trying to make, that it's not particularly O'Toole and what he's doing with the Conservative Party that is the threat to the Conservative Party. It's what his opponents are doing and what they may do in the future. Anyhow, we are rapidly running out of time. Thanks very much for coming out. We will speak again next week.
Thanks,
Take care.
guys.